something about it. Yeah, so everybody's good with that. Okay,
All right,
good.
take it
Anything else,
away.
Carl? Or are you good to go?
Nope, all yours.
All right. Carl, as the thing rings, if you could let folks
I
in,
will. Yep.
I
Yep.
got that one. Well, it's good to see everybody tonight, and I'm getting a spam phone call right now. um, good to see you. I'm John Hagan, forest ecologist. I was much younger when I started out as a forest ecologist, and I started working out of Greenville in the early 1990s. So your place holds a special place in my heart, and I'm really glad that I'm still working in the Greenville area of Maine. It's such a special place, and you're also lucky to have anything to do with it. I'm going to introduce a couple other people that I see on this call right now. One is Ben Shamgoshian. Wave Ben, you don't need to say anything, but Ben is my colleague, and Ben has been working with me for the past 3+ years on developing this map of late successional old growth forest. We'll talk more about it. Ben knows how to do all the computer programming that generated the map and the field work too. And then I see Roger Merchant on. I'm not sure I've met Roger in person, but wave Roger because Roger's I guess, a retired forester, uh, Forest Extension, University of Maine, knows everything about
Galapagos
forests,
County. Yeah.
and a fantastic photographer. If you need incredible pictures of forest, talk to Roger because he's got them. So Roger's going to help me talk through a piece of forest down in the Ottawa Lake area because it shows up on our map as being significant, and Roger knew about it already. So we got a great little group where you can stop me at any point. I'm going to make you sit through some science because it's so much fun for me about how this map got generated, and I hope it's entertaining for you. And then it's kind of the first half, and then we're going to talk about. I'm going to take you on a little tour, greater orbit around the Moosehead Lake area, and talk about some of the stands that we found in the mapping process, and that we've been to on the ground as well. And I hope you've got some ideas of. I've also got my GIS system up and running. So if you say, "Hey, John, could we look at?" I can turn off the slideshow and we can go zoom in on somewhere as well. Sometimes that crashes Zoom, so just be forewarned. But we can give it a try. So is everybody okay with the plan before I start the slides? Any questions about, again, stop me, jump in, just don't raise your hand, just speak with a group this size. Okay, let me get the slide deck running. And that should kind of do it. Can you see a pretty picture of Forrest? And that's Molly in the scene. So
Yes.
mapping,
Yep.
any questions? Okay, everybody good? All
hmm
right, I'm not going to do that. Hang on, I'm trying to get all these windows straight, and I'm going to leave that on. Okay, so let's get going. Late successional old growth. It's we call it affectionately LSOG. There's old growth, which you've heard that term before. Late successional is old too, but just a little bit younger, not quite there yet, and to be true old growth, but ecologically exceptional late successional forests. So we're going to talk about these two categories mostly tonight. And so why would we care about this anyway? Excuse me. Old forests, the trees just get really big, and they're aesthetically pleasing to look at. They're just very impressive. And a lot of people just don't enjoy looking at big trees, but they're also ecologically important for a forest. They Old trees take on a shape and a structure that you don't get in a tree that's 60 or 70 or 80 years old. They get kind of craggly at the top, like this particular yellow birch. They might lose branches at the top. And I don't know if you can see the barred owl there looking down on Ben and me. I think Ben took this picture through my phone or his phone and his binoculars on Giro Island. that's where a branch has broken off from a big old tree and has created a cavity, which is where these barred owls are nesting. And that's a fledgling that, thankfully, I don't think we made it fledge that day, but is probably within a few days of fledging. So old forest creates structures like that that are really important to a lot of different species. And big old trees can be rotten at the bottom and they become den sites for all kinds of mammals. So that's a structural feature that develops in an older forest that's important for all kinds of wildlife. Of course, big trees are important for pileated woodpeckers. This is a big woodpecker, but trees big enough for them to nest in and build cavities and forage on and that sort of thing. Trees kind of dying are often important to pileated woodpeckers. They will often drum on old dead trees as they're trying to let other pileated woodpeckers know to stay away from here because this is mine. So they like big hollow trees that they can really resonate on when they do their drumming. So that's again a characteristic of older forest. Then there's not very charismatic stuff to a lot of people. Ben and I like it because I don't know why, we just like fungi. But as trees begin to get old and sometimes start to rot on the inside or just die, they become habitat for a whole bunch of species that we don't think of very often, like fungi and like lichens. This is called Lobaria pulmonaria. Kind of looks like a lung. It's called lungwort, combination of an alga and a fungus. And you've probably seen this. If you've been out in the woods around Greenville, you've seen this, especially on older trees. So they're associated with older trees. You won't find this in younger forests, or you're unlikely to find it in younger forests. So these old forests and the big trees, you know what, they just die. And that's what what big old trees do. They die and they fall over and they become habitat for a whole nother set of mosses and lichens and species and saprozoic beetles, species that like dead wood, depend on dead wood. So big old trees are important even when they fall over to the forest ecosystem. I put this slide in because I came upon this paper a few weeks ago, Endangered Conifer Alerce, not sure I'm saying that right, in Spanish, Chile, tree 2,400 years old. And the researchers there found 361 original taxonomic units. You could kind of think of them as species of fungi under this one tree that were only under this one tree that old. And I put this slide in to point out we know a lot, but we don't know a lot. That is, we have not studied old forests well enough in Maine to know these kinds of things, species that we've never known and may not know for a long time that are associated with older forests. So you hate to lose a forest age class when you don't know everything you'd like to know about it yet. And this is a really good example, a reason to keep old forest around because there's stuff we don't know. The reason this LSOG is so hard to keep is because if and you guys know because you're in the middle of commercial forest country up there, if you're in the business of commercial forestry, you really don't want the forest to get older than 70 or 80. You're starting to lose money at that point. It's not that a 150-year-old tree isn't valuable. It could be, especially if it's a veneer tree, high quality tree like that. But in general, if you're in the business of doing forestry, 50, 60, 70 is kind of all you want it to get to be. So if you've got forest that's 150 or 200, your interest is in harvesting that and getting it on what would be called a shorter rotation, something that generates revenue more efficiently over time. So that's any that we've got that's on private commercial timberland is at risk of being lost because it's a money losing proposition. And I get it. It's not complicated. But you can see why it's on private land. It's why it's at risk and we're losing it. And we got data that shows how fast we're losing it on commercial timberland. The good news is we're keeping it on some other public lands, and we'll talk about that. So this is where we're going to get a little sciencey and nerdy, but I enjoy it so much you just have to sit through it. We use LIDAR, light detection and ranging, to map LSOG forest. And this is kind of new to us still. Ben and I both learned about this just 3 years ago, not knowing anything about it before. What it is if you got a modern car, you probably got LiDAR in your car because it's detecting distance from another car and beeping at you incessantly if something gets too close. So it's light detection and ranging, and airplanes have this. I mean, airliners have this too. Um, what it does is fire a laser beam at the ground. Lots and lots and lots of laser pulses per second per meter. Fires it at the ground, and those laser pulses reflect back off of whatever it hits. The last thing it can hit is the ground. Can't go any deeper than that. So, but some of those reflections bounce off the top of the tree. Some bounce off branches, and some bounce off the ground. The LiDAR was invented primarily to map elevation of the ground, topography. Have you ever seen a topo map? It's built off of LiDAR nowadays because it's so incredibly accurate. It can get the height of land within a few centimeters. We didn't used to be able to do it that way. So um, the thing that blows me away and why I often call it magic is because all LiDAR is doing, I say all, is measuring the time it takes for the light to get back to the plane from the top of the tree from the time it takes the laser beam to get from the ground back to the plane. This is light. We're talking, the speed of light is an amazing thing because it's the difference in the time it takes that light to get back to the plane that measures the height of the tree. See that's just the craziest thing. But that's how it works. So we can get the height of, so essentially trees are in the way of the people who do topographic mapping. That's a good thing because it tells us the height of the tree. They wish they'd all go away. We like it that trees are in the way. The good news for them is enough pulses get through to the ground that they can still map the ground. So we don't really cost them anything by having our trees in the way. But we learn a lot about the forest because the trees are in the way. So all LiDAR does this. I hope that looks like a tree to you. All LiDAR is a point cloud of X, Y, latitude, longitude, Z coordinates. How high above the ground? The Z is the height. And LiDAR creates this three-dimensional point cloud. If you're an art historian, it's kind of like pointillism, where you remember when they used to paint pictures in dots. And anyway, 1800s, or I don't know. I took art history a long time ago, but anyway, it's kind of like pointillism, and so, but that's really cool to be able to see the three-dimensional structure of a tree. How else would you get that remotely? You know, so so when you do that, and the airplane does it, and it flies as a route, it generates a picture like this. So all
Hmm.
that is hundreds of thousands of points in space, X, Y, Z. That's it. So as fancy as it might sound, it's not that complicated. Just a three X, Y, Z coordinate. It's just a lot of them. Okay. Everybody okay with that? Stop me if you think if I'm not making sense. I'm happy to. We got time. But that a forest ecologist who understands that the three-dimensional structure of a forest, the height of the trees, the gaps in the trees, trees that fall over, this 3D structure is gold for us because it sees things we can't see, especially without going there and looking at it. And even then, we can't do it as well as what LiDAR is doing. So we're queuing on this new technology. Hang on, I'll come back to that. But before LiDAR, which has really come on the scene in the last 5 to 10 years, it was invented 30 years ago, but it's only been used a lot in the last 5 or 10. Before LiDAR, we had no way to map old forest in Maine. You really depended on word of mouth. A forester says, hey, there's some over there across the West Branch, and I've been there a few times. You might go check that out. And sometimes people don't want to tell you where it is. So you got that going on too. So the beauty of LiDAR is we know where it all is. We don't care how close it is to a road, how remote it is, who wants to tell us about it or not. We see it all. And I'll show you some maps of that. So we've got this new tool for seeing how much we've got and where it is and who owns it, how fast we're losing it. It's a whole new day. Okay, now I wanted to digress for just a minute because I wanted to make sure you all knew that, again, I mentioned I started my career in the Moosehead Lake area in the early 90s, and we were doing a study of the effects of forestry on bird populations, 1992 and 1993. And the red dots on this map shows you places that we went and counted birds in 1992, early 1990s. And it was just the most fun I've ever had until I got into LiDAR, which is more fun. Anyway, so we did this study, effects of forestry on bird populations, and learned a lot and learned that even clear cuts were good for a lot of bird species of conservation concern. It was kind of revolutionary thought at the time. We redid that whole study in 2021 and 22. Not many forest ecologists live long enough to do a whole study all over again. I can't hear the birds anymore, so Ben had to count the birds. I said, Ben, go that way. And Ben went and counted birds and, along with the rest of the team. We redid the whole study, and it's published in a report in a couple in the scientific literature, but also this report. So if you go to ourclimatecommon.org and want to read about the bird study, you can. And Carla, I could do another whole talk on that sometime if you all get bored. But anyway, it's a really cool thing because it turns out that the forests in the greater Moosehead Lake region are, as we said in this report, seem to be functioning like a bird sanctuary for the nation. Many species had increased in abundance in the last 30 years. We don't understand it. We just take it as that's really good news. So read that study if you're interested in birds because it's fun. Now, when we did the second study in 2021 and 22, we had LiDAR. This is a LiDAR image, if you will, looking straight down on the forest. If you can see that grid on the screen, that's a 1 hectare grid or a hectare grid. So about 2.5 acres in each little grid. So to give you a sense of scale. But what you're seeing here, the yellows, you're seeing that the color is the height of the forest. That's all it is. So black is 0 to 2 meters. Black is roads. So it's low. And you can see the roads because the LiDAR sees how high the vegetation is. No vegetation in the roads. And then the yellows and the oranges are kind of mid-age forest. And then the blues and magentas are very tall forest. That's it. It's not terribly complicated. But remember, LiDAR is extremely precise, so it gets the height of the trees within a few centimeters. So it has incredible resolution, not only Z coordinate, but also it's a 1 meter resolution, so about 3 feet. It's an incredibly detailed map. You can see the structure. I'm not zoomed in here, but you can see the structure of individual trees if you look close enough. And so we saw that this is up north of the Golden Road. I'll show the perspective later. It's sort of where it is on the landscape. Blue magenta, and by this was 2022, and I think we were just looking at LiDAR and we were just catching on to this blue magenta thing. What's up with that? So we kept going out to the blue magenta stands and figuring out what are they. And it turned out that they're the LSOG stands. Almost, well, I would say in that year, without exception, every place we went turned out to be it. So we realized we've got an incredible tool here for mapping old forests in Maine. So if this switches fast enough, so that's the LiDAR version. Switching over. Ben, did that show up as green for you? Okay, thank you. That's the color image. Same exact scene. You can see the roads. If you look carefully, you see the roads. I'm going to back up one now. That's the LiDAR. That's the color image. You see how easy it is to it's a lot easier to see these stands in LiDAR than it is in color imagery. And it's, so again, that's why I keep calling this magic. because these LSOG stands lit up like a neon sign. We could go straight to them. Okay, so that's what's going. This is that stand. Now I would have bet Ben $100, maybe more, that that stand was not LSOG. So, but we went there, and why is that there? It's in a pretty cut over landscape because that place was cut pretty hard in the 70s and 80s. Roger knows that too. With the budworm outbreak, the West Branch area was cut hard because it was hit by the budworm, and so they were doing salvage operations at the time. Why this stand survived both the budworm and people, I do not know. But that stand did survive and often describe it as kind of a museum specimen today. It's, what did I say? It's about 121 acres or so, thereabouts. And it's just extraordinary ecologically.
So
And it'll stay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, why hasn't it been cut?
We don't know. We don't know. So it could be. There's nothing stopping anybody. There's no law that says it can't be cut. And maybe Roger has some speculation on this. From what I've heard from the foresters, I know the foresters who work, I knew the ones before and the one today too. And my guess is the foresters know this is special and they're just not cutting it. And because they have certain license to, they just said, I'm just not going to tell the boss about this, and I hate to bring it up publicly, but I really, it's just such a great example of what's out there, these hidden gems that we didn't know about. It should stay, in my opinion. It's worth a lot of money for the timber, but it's also incredibly special ecologically. And so, Bill, that's my answer. I can't answer it, but it's there. And I think the foresters know that I've talked to. Yeah, we're probably not going to mess with that. Bill, go ahead.
Is it true that they're limited in how big a tree is around, that it can't go through the mill or something?
It's gotten because the forest is so much smaller today than it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. Mills have adapted to a smaller diameter tree, to your point. And so I think it's harder for them to deal with a big tree, like these big white pine are too big to be worked with. So that's one reason they're staying. If the King of England was marking them 1645, they'd have been shit mass. But they're too big today. The spruce, on the other hand, and they are pretty big, and they could probably be managed by mills today. So there's valuable wood in there. So it's kind of a pine spruce stand. It's a bit unusual. We don't see this very often. But there it is. So that's good. So LIDAR was right. I would have bet it wasn't, but it was. And it was always right. So we said, okay, this is kind of cool. Ben and I said, maybe we should just try to map it for the whole unorganized territories. Why not go for broke and see what we can do with 10 million acres rather than just the greater Moosehead Lake area? If the principle works, it should work anywhere. So I'll come back and show you a map because we did it and it worked. But let me digress for a minute. We needed some kind of a classification system. I'm going to show you maps of this system, so I want to introduce you to it. Now, some kind of a way of putting stands into categories of stuff. We have to do that in order to manage stuff. We've got to put stuff, even though the forest is just a continuum from young to middle age to old. So we put these three categories. The green we call transitioning LS. Late successional. So it's kind of 100 years old, plus or minus. If you just let it grow for another 50 years, it would probably become late successional if it didn't blow over or burn or something like that, or the spruce budworm get it. So 150 years old, plus or minus. And if a late successional stand kept growing for another 50, it would become what we call true old growth, where we can't see any sign of human intervention anymore. They might have been in there in 1850, cut some pine back in the day. We can't see the evidence anymore. So when it gets to the point that we can't see the evidence anymore, and the trees are big and it has that structural complexity, we call it old growth. So that's our system. It's kind of green, lighter blue, darker blue, and that's our computer work. So again, it's called machine learning. What Ben did with the he took 400. We had been to 463 places on the ground. Ben and I, or our colleagues, and said, this is a not LSOG. This is a transitioning. This is a this. This is a that. No, we knew it to be true because we had been there on the ground. You call them training hectares. Okay, computer, we're going to train you on this. This is true. Take this and learn how to classify the rest of the landscape that we didn't go to. It's really kind of cool. So I'm gonna have this animate while I talk. Hopefully this all works. That's a hectare of LiDAR data from Big Reed. It's north of Baxter. It's a well-known true old growth stand, and you can see it's 120,000 dots. That's what you're looking at as it rotates around and up and down, and you can see the blue. There are holes in that, kind of gaps in that stand. That's what happens when a forest gets really old. Trees fall over and create gaps in the forest, and you can see that in this three-dimensional structure. It's a point cloud. So for each hectare in the I switch between hectares and acres all the time because a lot of people think in acres and scientists think in hectares, and we tend to do our math in hectares. This is a hectare, about 2.5 acres. So we had the computer calculate a bunch of canopy metrics, numerical characteristics of the canopy for all 4.2 million hectares in the unorganized townships. That almost broke the computer. It took days for Ben to get that to run, but it eventually got what we needed. And we had these 8 metrics. I'm not going to read them all to you. You don't need to read them. But my point is, for each hectare, we had these 8 numerical descriptions of the canopy surface. That's how we asked the computer to classify the forest. Okay, stick with me. I'm going to not bore you with science much longer. So, computer, please build us an algorithm that classifies all the remaining hectares in the unorganized territory based on the LiDAR metrics, canopy metrics of what we knew to be true. You could do this in any field. We just happen to be doing it in forest ecology. So we're going to go back out to the Golden Road. This is a hectare level grid. You see the blue magenta. You're familiar with that signature now because we've gone over it. And so we said, okay, computer, here's the canopy, what's called the canopy height model. We would like you to classify every hectare in this scene in the whole unorganized territories, but I'm zooming in for the purposes. So this hectare had these 8 unique signature numbers, if you will, and the computer said, okay, given these numbers, this is the most likely class for that hectare. So it put it in the late successional category based on the canopy metrics. So we just did that for the whole unorganized territories. Lots and lots of computer time. But you can see there's kind of a core of LS, some old growth like. We call it old growth like. If the computer has modeled it and called it old growth, we won't call it old growth unless we've been there and stood in it and said it is. So we call that the computer's classification old growth like. The computer said it was, but we haven't been there, so we're not 100% convinced yet. Often it is right. Okay, but you can see how having a map like this, if you're a land manager or a land trust, and you're interested in knowing places that you should, assuming you're interested in old forest, ecological, and I should have said this at the beginning, I know a land trust has a lot of things that you're interested in conserving. Old growth may be one of them, but you've got a lot of other things you care about too, and I get it, recreation. But if old forest is one thing you're interested in, this is a pretty good map because it shows you where this particular value lies in the area of interest. Okay, now this stand was interesting to it was one of the first ones that we studied and looked at in more detail. We had some of our training plots in the stand. And I showed this slide because we took an increment core of one of the spruce, pretty run-of-the-mill spruce, and it wasn't exceptional in that stand. And it was 253 years old. If I count, you just count the rings. And this is kind of what turned me from a scientist into a what's the other word? No, I'm not a poet, but if I could be, it might have turned me into a poet, because I realized this tree was a seedling when the first shot was fired in Lexington in 1776. So, and if you all probably know that Thoreau walked through went through the area and crossed the Northeast Carry into the West Branch in 1850 something or other. I think I had it on here. 1846 he walked. So I like to say he could have walked by this tree. It would have been 70 when he walked by it in 1846. So it's when you know the age of the trees and the stand you're walking through, it kind of puts it in a different perspective. It's not so scientific anymore. There's something else going on, and you kind of feel a little bit small. And a lot younger than these trees. Anyway, this was a special place to us for this reason, but it was pretty typical of the blue magenta stuff. So we had no idea that trees that old were out on the landscape. Okay, so I'm backing up here, and this is I'm not showing the whole state of Maine, but a chunk of Maine that's centered around Moosehead Lake. We didn't model the organized territories, so there's an edge down here where we just didn't go. We're thinking about doing that too, but it presents new complications. We're going to zoom in on this and look at some areas more closely, but I'm backing up to show you the big picture, sort of the satellite view. And so if you see greens and blues, and you can't really see the darker blue because there's not many of those and they don't stand out, but okay, there's a lot going on up here in Baxter. So I talked to the friends of Baxter last Saturday and showed them slides of Baxter. We're going to look at Moosehead today, but there's a lot of LSOG up in and around the Baxter area, especially in the northern part of the park and outside the park to the southeast, the Namacanta TNC. I think it's a preserve now. Anyway, my point is this is a map of LSOG, and it's right about 90% of the time, which is incredibly good for a remote sensing technique where you didn't actually go there. You just let the LiDAR tell you. Okay, now if you want to, the transitioning is interesting to us, but it's not as interesting as the LS and OG, the two blues, because they're not as much of it. I'm going to switch to just the blues. So you can see we lose a lot, not lose, but there's a lot less of the higher quality, older stuff on the landscape, as you would expect.
Yep.
So if I gave you a map, I'd say, well, pay attention to the blues first, because those are going to be really hard to replace. They're older. And frankly, they're more valuable from a timber point of view. So they often will have a new road to them if they're on commercial timberland, understandably, because they're worth a lot of money. It's like having a bank of money sitting out there, like that stand that I showed you, the pine and the spruce, the first slide I showed you. Anyway, so that's the map we produced for the unorganized territories and then some of Maine. And I can send you guys pictures, screenshots, or GIS layers, whatever you want that you're interested in. You can have all of it. I want you to have it in whatever way works for you. So there are some limitations. I always want to make sure to point this out. We did not model stunted old growth, like stunted spruce fir at the tops of mountains or stunted black spruce that's often waterlogged and doesn't grow very fast.
In the mountains.
Yeah. I'm getting some voices here. Speak up if anybody's got a question. So there's not a lot of that in Maine. There's some of that. So we modeled the stuff that's predominant. There's half decent soils, grows a half decent tree, and it grows tall. And so that's what we modeled. We thought about modeling the high elevation LSOG. We haven't gotten to that yet, don't have the money for it, but it probably could be done because of the detailed image you get with LiDAR. So those are just limitations. We didn't model that stuff and want to be clear about it. So I'm going to pause here because we're about to take a little tour around Moosehead Lake. Any questions about the science or how this works before I move on? And you don't have to say anything now, but it just gives me a chance to take a breath. Okay, let's keep going. We're going to zoom in a lot closer than this, so I'm just getting you oriented. So this is the canopy height model for the Moosehead Lake area. We're back to the oranges and yellows, and if you look closely, you can see the hints of blues and magentas, up towards Baxter Park, the Namacanta area, and some other areas, the Sabumic area, and even down here in the Big Moose area, you see these shades of blue magenta. Those are likely LSOG areas. So this is what, again, to remind you, this is what we were using to develop the computer model. So this is the same thing. This is just taking the canopy height model and saying, computer, please classify this for us into the greens and the two blues. And this is what you've got. Again, Namacanta is very rich in LSOG forest. You got this, what is that? What's the name of that island out there? I forgot the name of it.
That's is that Sugar?
Sugar,
Sugar Island?
Sugar Island, yeah.
Hmm.
It has and had a lot of LSOG. It was harvested a few years ago, partially. So some of that is not quite the same as it was 10 years ago, but it's still got a lot of nice LSOG forest. So you can see the lay of the land. And again, we're going to zoom in. We're going to keep zooming in closer and talk about specific places. But that's essentially the kind of map you've got to work with if you're interested in LSOG. Let's see, this was one of the first scenes we looked at. We were still doing the bird study, and this was one of the first stands I noticed in blue magenta, heavy to magenta, very tall. And this was close enough. We stayed at a camp right down on the lake there. So this was easy to get to. And so we went up there and said, what's that? Again, back when we were trying to interpret this canopy height model, that's Scammon Ridge. For those of you who know the Greenville area really well, it's not far. Well, just north of Wilson Pond. Is that lower Wilson Pond? I can't read the name on the map. Upper and lower, I think. Anyway, stands out as blue magenta. What is that? Okay, this is the classification by the computer. It stands out as blue LS and with some speckles of old growth surrounded by the transitioning stuff. And so we went up there. That's what it looks like I didn't quite get to the top because I was out of breath, but it was close to the top because it was uphill. If you know Scammon Ridge, it's a ridge. Anyway, exceptional hardwood forest up there. And I don't know, I think I looked up who owned it and I forgot who owned, somebody owns it. Anyway,
John,
yes, Carla.
so yeah, so Scammon Ridge, and I think we have Brian on the call too, maybe Brian Wenzel. So there was a big concert. Oh, and Forest Society too. I think Chris is here, but
Hey, Brian, yeah.
so there was a big chunk of Scammon Ridge that was just put under conservation easement a year and a half ago or something. So is anyone on the call? Were these woods protected, or is the easement cover something different?
John, you may remember, I think most of it is actually not on the easement. The best of it is
yeah.
not.
Right. Hey, Brian, good to see you. Yeah, I didn't see you on the call. It's unfortunately the line runs right. The easement is just on the north side, which is good.
Okay.
Because that's nice forest too. It's got some green transitioning. I've been in there. I've walked it with Kyle Burdick, your forester, and it's really nice stuff. But don't make no bones about it. This is better, taller, better, older. And whoever owns it has been cutting firewood on the lower end. I think firewood probably. I'm not sure what they make. So they've gone in there, but they haven't quite got up to they've gotten about halfway up the ridge. It's really nice. Somebody ought to do something about it. You guys maybe can do something. It's really nice forest. And there's another patch over here I haven't been into, but it probably looks a lot like this. Anyway, Scammon Ridge, one of the first stands we saw that sort of helped us understand what we were looking at. And it is exceptionally valuable and right, a stone's throw from downtown Greenville. And so the map is right. The map is right. The canopy height model was right. It's really good stuff. And that's what it looks like when you hike up a ways. And the forest floor, and it looks like old forest, like it's supposed to be, with great big old logs having fallen, big trees about to fall someday. All right, we're going to go down to Ottawa. I don't know if this is still in your area of interest, but it ought to be. And if it isn't, I'm going to make a case for it. Roger and I are both going to make a case for this. So that's I guess Borestone Mountain. That's the red line is the Maine Audubon's ownership of the area, so that's protected and off limits to harvesting, and that's all good. That's the lake, the Appalachian Trail, the railroad track that runs along. I'll show you pictures of that Roger's taken in a minute. But that's the lay of the land, and that's Wilson Stream. That's Wilson Stream, going in the valley there. So we're going to take a look. That's the computer's classification of the canopy height model. So there's a big, nice, we've been in there. That's true old growth. Ben and I sampled that last summer, along with Greg from the Forest Society of Maine. It's true old growth. Even though it was called LS, our model doesn't always get those classifications right. This was true old growth. Exceptional stuff on both ends. So really good stuff, and I'm glad it's protected by Maine Audubon. There's some interesting pieces that are a part of that same stand that aren't protected, by my knowledge anyway. So you see the stand, the blue stand, it extends around the flanks of Borestone. This piece is managed by Prentice and Carlisle, and I don't know the owner. This piece, I don't know the owner either. Maybe some of you do, but the point is it's privately owned. It's not protected from harvesting. And if somebody in land conservation wanted to protect something really important and keep that whole stand intact, those would be two places I would put on my list. And Roger, jump in if you know things about these particular areas. But we've been in them. They're really nice. And so again, no doubt about it, they're candidates for land if LSOG is something of interest. Okay, so that's one part of this scene. The other, and that's the ownership map. I do have some of the ownership from the Sewell Company. And again, this piece is managed by Prentice Carlisle. That's Audubon. That's, I don't know. That's Malone land. John Malone, who owns a bunch of land in Maine. That's red as Appalachian Mountain Club. Anyway, you see, and then Elliotsville Plantation, Weyerhaeuser, a piece here, and Weyerhaeuser has a piece here that we're going to look at in more. Anyway, Elliotsville Plantation, to my knowledge, is it was the Roxanne Quimby thing, I think. So I think they're into land conservation. I don't know that they're doing any harvesting on that land base. Maybe they are, I don't know, but I do know that they were motivated by conservation. All right, let's look at this piece, which I think Roger pointed out to us 2 years ago, and we had seen it in our canopy height model. It was blue magenta, and we thought we should go there sometime and see what that really looks like, and we did. And then we linked up with Roger, so we're going to look a little closer. This is Roger's topo map, an area that he had mapped out with the red dotted as special. I don't, Roger, if you want to, can you say anything about how you came to know about this piece?
Yeah, I'll give you a brief overview of
please
that.
do.
You can hear me all right?
Sound great.
So back in the late 1990s, artist Bruce Tolles, a friend of mine, he and I started wandering off trail, off Borestone and other places, and we began to wander here and there, and we wandered up this area you're looking at inside the red dots, and we found our way to Camp 12, which had a cliff on it that overlooked the forest up the stream, between the stream and the Canadian Pacific Railroad tracks. And I had my forestry lens on that day, and I said, "Boy, doesn't that look like old growth forest because of the size of the crowns, the diversity of species?" And I was kind of keen about it. Well, it didn't do much that day or thereafter, but about 10 years later, when Plum Creek was going through their conservation proposal, it became evident to me that there was a plan to harvest the Big Wilson forest. And I was concerned about that because I looked at the Big Wilson forest also in a larger context of the larger landscape. And a lot of the other landscape is much younger in terms of ages and stages. So I thought that Big Wilson Forest had some worth in protecting. So when I found out that there was a timber harvesting plan in the works, I decided to take my camera and I went up there in the fall, the winter, and the following spring and generated over 500 images of the Big Wilson Forest. And I wrote up a forestry assessment from my forest management perspective and some sample images. And I sent them off to Lurk and the other entities. There you see it from the top of Camp 12 curve. You can see the coarseness size of the spruce and some pine on the left there. There's hardwoods down in the bottom. Yep. And it goes up around past the bend, and the north end of it is on the Appalachian Trail. So that's how the Big Wilson Forest got onto the old growth forest map. And the short story of it is Maine Natural Areas Program came in and did a reassessment with their foresters and people and Plum Creek people and determined that it was worth protecting. And there was some negotiations, I guess, that went on that eventually resulted in a deed document being attached to the document, the landowner's document of this. And the deed document was attached with that, that's on file with the deed in the Piscataquis County courthouse, made clear that there would be no harvesting conducted on this parcel of land that belonged to, at that time, Plum Creek and now Weyerhaeuser. That's the short, long story.
So do you think it's protected legally now from harvest, or do you know?
Yes,
Oh,
it is.
it is.
What's her name from Forest Society, Maine? Karen
Karen
Tilburg.
Karen
Tilburg.
Tilburg. Yep.
Yeah.
Karen, towards the end of it, Karen had a hand in it too, and she informed me that they had come to a place and worked it such that the protection document for this parcel of land within Weyerhaeuser's ownership, larger ownership, would be designated for conservation, preservation, no timber harvesting.
Mhm.
That's great. I had heard recently about a parcel in near Ottawa that was worth protecting, that was people thought was old growth, and anytime there was talk about cutting it, it created quite an uproar.
Yeah,
Would this be that same parcel, Roger?
I think it might be.
Yeah, sounds like it.
I was
Wow.
working for Cooperative Extension at the time in Dover Foxcroft in forestry and tourism development, so I really had to be kind of cautious about how I handled all of this. But you can see here some of the pictures of the diversity, including the floodplain deciduous forest that is stunning in its own right.
And if folks are interested, there a few years ago, Roger, you remember we recorded a podcast episode from our podcast, A Talk in the Woods. And we
Thank you.
recorded it on the property, and I put the link in there if folks want to listen to Roger talking out in the forest about this place.
So we're pretty happy because we found it independent. Roger found it first, but we we also found it, which meant that our map was finding important stuff
Yep.
out there. It overlapped very nicely. So that's, I guess that's going to go back here. Yeah, see, Elliott, it's kind of landlocked too. Weyerhaeuser would have to cross the AT and then cross the railroad track to get to it
Yeah.
from this side. Anyway, it was difficult to get to, I think, also, Roger, from from the lay of the land, which maybe
It was, and there was one interesting thing that actually, in an indirect way, contributed to the protection, and that was the fact for the longer period of time, this parcel was not accessible. And the reason for that was because of the railroad tracks going up through there.
yeah,
And the railroad company required that if any logging trucks were to cross those tracks at a designated location, they had to have some 1,500 feet of view either way where they were going to cross the tracks. And of course, if anybody's taking the train up that valley,
you don't.
not 1,500 feet long
Yeah,
sections on that curvy parcel. So that was part of what led to this isolation of this parcel. And when Annie Cutco and others went up there, they found no evidence of any sign of historic logging.
yeah, yeah. Same with us when we went in there.
Yeah.
Uh, and so those are Roger's pictures. Thank you, Roger, for sending them yesterday. Great photographs. You can check in with Roger if you want pretty pictures of forest. Um, we ended up, this was in that stand, it ended up being the cover of our 2024 report, where we summarized all of what we've done here because it was just such a beautiful place. So it made the cover. And again, if you haven't seen that report and want it, just go to our Climate Common. It's on our website. Okay, we're going to swing around, do a big loop. We're doing okay on time. We're going to do a big loop. If you want to go somewhere else, I've got the GIS system up. But let's just look around at the blues in the greater Moosehead area. I'm going to do a kind of a counterclockwise swing. And if anybody knows more about these areas, speak up. I'll put some arrows in to point out some things. But if you know places and you want to say something about it, just jump right in. What's that mountain? I can't read. Benson Mountain.
Benson.
There's a lot there, and it's on AMC land. And I don't think I'm going to come back to this later, but there's some areas that are off limits to harvesting for a variety of reasons. So you kind of don't have to worry about those. But I do not believe Benson is in that category. It is owned by AMC. And of course, they harvest much lighter and gentler than a typical commercial landowner, but they do harvest. So it could be harvested, but that's someplace I have not been and would like to go and see what that's like. There's also, maybe somebody knows, is often see the AT running through here. You often see nice stuff along the AT because landowners, if they own it, they're kind of sensitive to cutting too close to the AT. So it kind of makes a ribbon of LS forest here. It's going over a mountain there. So you see that there's another big blob here that's of interest, probably because of the AT. There's some down here, partly because of the AT, but it's not protected from harvest. This is another stand. Go ahead. Anybody jump in?
That down there along the Barren Chairback Range in the AT, over by Barren Ledges. I was in there 4 years ago and photographed some of the timber and trees growing between the corridor and further down slope. And there definitely is some older growth forest in that area. The landowner who owns that, I'm not sure, but he's got signs. They've got signs and bridge posting and everything down in Bodfish Valley. That's the information there. And the other place up there where the trail turns northwards, that looks like that's going right along the edge of Gulf Haggis.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
So that's probably protected as well. This is the ownership. I'm going to switch back in a second, but this is the ownership of the same. So again, the yellow is AMC. This is a logger, EJ Carrier. You see the Weyerhaeuser you're familiar with. Anyway, Malone, Weyerhaeuser, Cassidy. That's I think a logger. No, that managed by PNC, a management company. McGillis Timberlands. Anyway, it's important to overlay who owns the stuff on the outside because that tells you a lot about the potential fate of that stand. We don't want to worry about stands or tracks that are protected, don't need to. But if they're vulnerable to harvesting, we might want to know that. Backing up one, this was another stand we discovered on the east side of Baker Mountain that showed up as magenta and blue magenta and then mapped out as LS. Really exceptional forest. And that is now in an AMC reserve, so that will not be harvested. So again, you almost have to take these stands one by one, and there aren't that many. I mean, there's a couple dozen really in the greater Moosehead area, and you can what Ben is doing right now is kind of looking stand by stand across the landscape. What should we be doing, or somebody should be doing about each of these? Okay, ownership map. I'm going to do a series of kind of the LSOG map and the ownership map. Big Spencer Mountain, Little Spencer Mountain. Big Spencer has again, this is Namacanta. That's protected. That's TNC land. I don't know whether it's in your jurisdiction or not, but at least it's protected and you don't have to worry about it. And often you see these lines like this down here. What's up with that line? That's an ownership boundary, not an artifact of LIDAR. That's BPL. Oops, I lost that's BPL. And that's, I don't know, Weyerhaeuser or somebody else. Different management styles right along a boundary. So same thing with Big Spencer, that we recognize that as special for special older forest way back. And I forgot who's on from the Forest Society here, but the Forest Society of Maine at the time, this was late 90s, got that area protected as an ecological reserve, off limits to harvesting now. So that's great. Little Spencer has nice stuff around it too, and that's not protected to my knowledge. So again, the ownership map, this is BPL owns this, but it's an ecological reserve. And then, oh yeah, there's that boundary, Tall Timbers, which is a TIMO timber investment, and then BPL. So you can see the difference in the ownership. Not criticizing anybody, it's just it's interesting that the ownership and the motive of the landowner is recognizable in remote sensing. Okay, moving on. This was the first stand I showed you with the big pine and spruce. That's that island of old forest. I called it the museum specimen up there. That's the Golden Road. That's Salmon Pond. We often call it the Salmon Pond stand. There it is. It's, easily identifiable. This is that other pet with the spruce that was started when the shot was fired at Lexington. That's in that stand right there. Neither of these are protected by any way that we know of. And this stand, I'm kind of sad to say that it has been partially cut since we did our work in there, cut last summer. And Ben and I counted the rings on the spruce that was the stumps. And they were 190, 200, 270. They were old. So it wasn't clear cut, but it was partially cut. So anyway, it's worth a lot of money. So anyway, there's lay of the land, ownership map for the same area, or the manager, J.M. Huber, is managing that stand for who I've forgotten. BPL owns most of Sabumak. Weyerhaeuser a lot west of Moosehead Lake.
John, that last, this is Brian, that last stand you mentioned that's managed by Huber, I think I went in on that this winter on a forest management tour hosted by the Northern Forest Center. I think it's a mapped deer yard, so it has some protection, but I think in the name of maintaining the deer yard, that was the reason that they convinced IF&W to let them harvest, and so I think they did it in consultation with IF&W. If it's the same stand I'm thinking of, yeah.
It is. So, you're exactly right, Brian. And so some stands are called deer yards. If you don't know the deer yard thing, they're generally leaning to conifer, spruce, and fir and pine, and they're good for deer hang out there in the winter because the snow is not as deep and it's just easier for them to survive. So that was a so-called designated deer yard. It's got hardwood in it too, but it's a lot of spruce and fine.
I'm not a forester, so I'm not making any judgment. I'm just
Yeah,
sort of
no, right, that's
passing
right.
on what was said.
No, well, thank you for bringing that up because often we do when we come upon LSOG stands, they are not infrequently deer yards, so-called designated by IF&W. That's why they're old still, because IF&W puts restrictions on how much you can cut. You can't clear cut them, and you have to cut so much at a light enough level that you still have some of that winter cover for deer. So fortunately, part of that stand is still there, but the landowner really wanted those big spruce, and so they got some of them. If I had the money to pay them, I'd have paid them not to cut that stand because it was so exceptional and still does have exceptional trees in it. Thank you, Brian, for bringing that up. Good point. Okay, ownership, and then swinging around clockwise again to the northwest of Moosehead Lake. I have not been out here, so I don't know this country very well, but this township has a lot of green and blue in it, and it would be something I'd be curious to go see at some point. And I got the ownership, so let's see who owns it. That's Cassidy, managed by P&G, I think that says. That's Passamaquoddy.
Prentice and Carlisle.
Prentice
Oh,
and
no.
Carlisle. P&C. Thank you,
Yep.
P&C. I should have known that. P&C. So that's kind of special. Somebody ought to be talking to them about that stand. That's big enough and interesting enough. And then Passamaquoddy, I don't, they can do what they want to do, but they've still got some. Often the tribal lands have better LSOG because they've cut it more lightly than our commercial landowners. But I really don't know what we can do politically to, encourage them to do something different. It's their sovereign land, just like the commercial timberland is in a way. Anyway, Weyerhaeuser owns a big chunk of west of Moosehead Lake, and you see not much greens backing up one. Kind of white, isn't it? It's not a lot of greens and blues out there because it's commercial timberland and it's been, harvested like a commercial timberland owner would do. But there are pieces out there. Then swinging south west, there's, I don't know, again, this is kind of maybe out of your area, but this is Spencer Lake. Incredible stuff over there. I have not been there either. That's owned by John Malone. And so I don't think he likes to be bothered by people, but he owns a lot of LSOG. And I don't know whether maybe he says, look, I'll take care of it. Don't bother me about it. But it would be nice if somebody engaged him in a conversation about his intentions for the future of that stuff around Spencer Lake, because it's one of the biggest tracts of LSOG in Maine. And some huge pine, too, out there. Ownership of the same area. Always like to do the ownership because it tells us so much. Again, Malone land, Malone. This is that's BPL, this piece up here. So they cut kinder and gentler, BPL, so they're pretty good. Sometimes I'd like them not to cut the stand because the stands are so exceptional, but when they do cut, they do a really good job of keeping the late successional old growth characteristics. So that's a good owner up there with respect to LSOG. Anyway, then just close to home, because we spent a lot of time in Big Moose, near Greenville Junction, downtown Greenville. This is the LSOG map. A lot of green transitioning LS. Mostly, it's really nice stuff. And of course, it's BPL, so it would be nicer than average. They've done a lot of partial cutting in here, but again, they cut so lightly that it doesn't really take it out of our LSOG class. It's the lower one, the good, better, best. It's the good, so it's green. But it's nice and it's close to Greenville, and you probably don't need to worry about it because it's BPL ownership. So you're getting the idea. You want to kind of match the LSOG map with who owns it and what's its risk of disappearing. So you can set your priorities that way, so you don't just chase everything you see on the landscape. Again, same ownership map of that area. A few more slides, and I'm going to stop and let you all talk and brainstorm together. This is a map of easements that I got in the database that I could get from Maine GIS anyway. So easements within the greater Moosehead Lake area, and they have different names, and I can't remember all the names, but just so you know, this stuff has been eased. That is, it will not become developed. It's eased from development. It's not eased to protect LSOG. So you could have LSOG in here and it would be cut. Unless somebody from Forest Society of Maine says, no, you can't. But that wasn't the deal when you made when you made this, to keep development from happening, conversion from forest to some other land use. So this is the green part here. They're called gap 1 and 2, but all it really means is these are areas that cannot be harvested. Or if you do harvest them, you better have an ecological reason for harvesting them, like a disease outbreak or something that you're trying to stop. So that's Baxter up there. That's Namacanta. There's parts of whoever owns that. I don't know who owns that. Probably BPL, and it's probably ecological reserve or something. Big Spencer Mountain is an ecological reserve. Part of Lobster Lake is an ecological reserve, I think. Out here, can't remember the name. Anyway, my point is, it's good to have these maps if you're a land trust to know, okay, who's doing what in my area of interest. It can help you sort out your priorities. Does anybody know what this is a map of? And Carly, you can't answer because you saw this on Saturday. Anybody want to take a guess about what the red stuff is? Okay, I'll give you 3 more seconds. 2, 1. There's some telltales here, like Baxter doesn't have any red stuff. What's up with that? Namacanta doesn't have any red stuff. These are harvest blocks from 2000 to 2024. So every year, from a data source called Global Forest Watch, and they produce this every year. So you could actually put little labels on them and show what year that particular red spot was harvested. But so when you look at this map and you see the places without red, those are places that have been off limits to harvesting. So there's a lot of harvesting that goes on, and that's good. Our rural communities need harvesting. They wouldn't be able to survive without it. I'm personally fine with harvesting, except I'd rather not harvest the museum specimens that we're never going to get back once we lose them. I would like to be cognizant of that. And we need people like you to lead that charge because we can't do it. We don't have the capacity, but you guys do. So anyway, this is a useful map to have in your computer as well. And I overlaid the easements because the easement map and the off limits map that I showed you earlier, you can see there's a lot of harvesting in easements. Easements do not stop harvesting. A lot goes on there. I'm not saying easements are bad. I think they're great, especially if you live 100 years. You're going to be glad you've got those easements. But whoever follows us is going to be really glad they're there. So they're incredibly important. But they don't stop harvesting of LSOG. That's my only point. And you see, this must have been a recent off limit. The green is an off limits to harvesting, but there's some red on top of that. So it must have been some harvesting in there before it became so-called gap 1, gap 2. Anyway, useful map to have. So I'm winding down a few more slides. Just to point out the value of what we've been doing, and not to be immodest, but I mean, we found a 700-acre tract of true old growth using LiDAR that we would have never known about without the canopy height model and Ben's modeling. And it's north of Baxter and T8 R10 or something like that, but nobody seemed to know about this. It's incredible. I'll take you there if you want to go sometime, because I'd like to go again. I wouldn't miss a chance to go in there. The tallest tree in Maine, by the way, is that we found is in this stand, just on the other side of that ridge. which is another
Mhm.
cool story. Anyway, so my point is this technology is letting us find these things that we had no idea about before. And that's just really cool. Okay, all of this is kind of the mapping work that we've done, to my surprise, and to some people's dismay, but to my to my surprise, actually led to a bill last year called LD 1529, an act to enhance the protection of high value natural resources statewide. This is a lot of words to basically say that this is a directive, if you will, to the state of Maine to quantify how much LSOG it has, not just in the unorganized, but the organized, to and to develop conservation strategies to protect it. Now, they're not saying anybody's going to take land away from anybody. It calls for developing creative strategies for conserving LSOG. Hey, landowners, whatever you need to come up with to conserve it, develop the mechanism and do it. And you should know about 1529 because it might be some wind at your back if you want to conserve some of the LSOG stands in your area. Use 1529 to say, hey, we're just doing what the state's directing everyone to do. So it's a good thing from my perspective. And NRCM, Natural Resources Council of Maine, really spearheaded getting that through. It was sponsored by Senator Bennett, a Republican. So hooray for that. Anyway, it passed, signed by Janet Mills on July 1st, 2025, and their first meeting is tomorrow. If anybody wants to go, you can attend by Zoom, which is how I'm going to do it. So they're starting their discussions, stakeholder discussions on how they're going to address this, the directives of this LD 15.9. So that's really cool because I've been doing science a long time and have never had it turn into policy. So this is the first. Happened just in time. Essentially 1529 asks us this question, all of us, all of you, me, everybody, how much LSOG do we want and how do we want it distributed across the state of Maine? And so people like you and Brian with the Maine Mountain Collaborative and Forest Society of Maine, I mean, this is your role. This is where we did the science, we did the map, and that's all we know how to do. We're stuck. We're at the end. We got other interesting things to do like carbon calculations and conserving it with carbon offsets, but basically it's in you got your hands to really do something with this now if you're interested and it meets your mission. All of our reports are available online. You can get them. We've done 3 relating to LSOG forest since 2024. They're all really good. Especially the middle one, which Ben wrote, and is about how if you went into a stand and wanted to classify it yourself, it's a rapid assessment protocol. In 20 minutes, with almost no training, you can decide. You can put the stand in our green, blue classification yourself, and you plug your numbers into a computer. When you get home and go online, it tells you what it is. So it's just fun. It's kind of gamifying LSOG conservation. I'll point out our funders. Lots of people make this happen. This isn't cheap. Just to give you a sense of scale, I would say we've spent around $300,000 in the past 3 years, maybe a little more, getting us to this point. Now that we're here, it's a lot easier. It would be cheaper to do this. And we just did this for a part of New Brunswick in Canada. And it was a lot cheaper because we know what we're doing now. But you needed the ground plots. You needed to go out and see them. You needed the training hectares. It was a lot of work. It was fun work. Make no mistake about it. But it was a lot of work. So anyway, I'm going to stop there. Carla, you can moderate questions or ask questions or follow up
sure.
or just close us off with whatever. But thank you for your time and patience on a Thursday night to hear some science.
Thank you, John. It's fascinating stuff, and I would be interested to look at that the harvesting map that you showed. I think it was it from 2000 to 2024?
That's correct.
I'd be interested to look at that like over a 10-year plot to see my intuition tells me that harvesting is slowing down in the region, but I don't know if that's a fact.
Harvesting is slowing down, has been for like 15 years across the state. And
Yeah.
the mills are shutting down. You know the story as well as I do. It's kind of bleak from the perspective of the forest economy.
Right.
So yeah, that is happening as a background pattern for quite a
Right.
while now.
Mhm. Good. Yep.
Sandy
So
has a
if
question.
people have questions, yep, go ahead.
Thanks, John. It was a really interesting program. I noticed on the maps that a lot of the LSOG areas look like islands surrounded by non-LSOG areas. And I was curious if you did you work with like an ornithologist or a biologist or anybody to study to see whether there was an island effect? And whether it would be important to connect those LSOG areas with each other by leaving natural corridors or something like that?
Um, let's see. Yes, we work with ourselves because we're both we're ornithologists too, and we understand sort of the conservation landscape element of what we're doing and the connectivity of stuff and all of that. It's an interesting. I'm going to try to do this efficiently. It makes a lot of sense to try to where are the big stands and can we connect them so that there's some functionality, species can move without being constrained, without a clear cut in the way or mid-age forest in the way. So that's a great idea, and people haven't studied that much specifically in Maine that we could point to a peer-reviewed study that said that patch is not doing well. But we do know that. So if I were a land trust, and most have this approach, show me where the big things are, and that they're listed in our prioritization report. The last one on our page has a list of 130 stands that are across Maine that are big, and somebody ought to pay attention to. You can also look at connectivity. I wouldn't get too obsessed with the connectivity thing, because like the 700-acre tract of true old growth that I showed you, I don't care whether it's connected or not. That ought to be set aside. So I wouldn't let other criteria, in your rubric of what to conserve, dominate your sort of qualitative assessment of whether a site should be protected or prioritized. Does that make sense? It's easy to start to develop a mathematical, and then you miss stuff that's right in front of you that you should have been protecting. The other thing about our mapping could find patches as small as a hectare because that's how our system worked. So we found literally thousands of 1 and 2 hectare patches of LS or OG. And you might say those are too small to be of use. They're not too small because the lichens and mosses, some of the most sensitive species to older age classes, do fine in a 1 hectare patch. Not birds, which you were kind of alluding to, but some of the stuff that we know the least about and that is most tightly linked to old forest will survive in those patches for a long time. So if you wanted to ever restore that landscape, those little teeny patches are going to be like little inoculi for the rest of the landscape. So we emphasize to people, do not dismiss those little bits. I get they might be harder to conserve. They're not hard to map. We know exactly where they are. It's not like it, and we can track them. But you kind of have to develop a plan to keep them. And that's where we would engage our commercial landowner friends and say, look, here's the map. You got like 850 little pieces all over the place. They're in your system now because we gave them to you. Could you work to try to protect them and keep them and work around them? Because in the long term, they could be really important. They are right now little refugia for biodiversity. So it's not one or the other. yes, you can take a big connected strategy, but let's also be paying attention to, because if you want wide distribution, the little pieces become really important. Does that make some sense? Yeah. Roger, jump right in.
Listening to this, really, it brings back a piece of history that came to me about this back in the early 1990s. I believe it was Malcolm Hunter was the professor and researcher with Humane Forestry and Wildlife. Published a book at that time, and he put forth data from forest data about what was changing in the woods at that time. And I recall him specifically speaking with me about this, and he said, you know, you take any species has a lifespan where it biologically ends, like balsam fir, maybe 80 years. On the other hand, pine, maybe 300 years. On the one hand, maybe white birch at 100 years, maybe yellow birch at 300. So there's this diversity of ages and stages that are in the mix of forest cover and types. And he was bringing up the point at that time that it appeared that what was happening with forest practices, because they were harvesting the larger stands and trees like that, that in fact, 20%, the upper 20% of the life cycle of forest trees in general were no longer in the main woods. So your idea about what can we do to bring this into the conversation about forest practices, ages, and stages, I think is really important, because the forest needs all of those stages. And if you eliminate LSOG forests, you're losing not just the trees, you're losing the wildlife, you're losing the small things and the large things that go with that, that we need more information on, I think.
Well, all very perfectly said, Roger. And I mean that, but I don't, I think the social question is a social question that LD 1529 is going to address. How much do we want and where do we want it? Like, okay, we got it in Baxter, we got it in Namacanta, we got this great borestone piece, we got stuff around. How much more do you want, people? That's a that's a perfectly legitimate question. I'm not the one to answer that. I would like more, but that's just John. So, and I don't want to hurt the forest industry. So, but then again, I just soon not lose the stuff like the 700-acre tract that's not protected. I'd really rather not lose that if I can not lose that. So we need a civil, and I see Andy Whitman on the call here because Andy's running the 1529 or has at least participating in the 1529 process as part of the Maine Forest Service. So that they're going to have to figure out the answer to that question: how much we want and how do we want it distributed, and what are we going to do about it, assuming we can figure out what we want. So it's great. It's the kind of social conversation we should be having. And the answer may not suit me perfectly, but at least we're having it. And so it's really great that Maine is at this point that we can discuss that, hopefully civilly, with some really new creative ideas. Chelsea, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I'm just curious if now that you've identified these spots and they're obviously so significant, has there been an increase in research in those areas, or like you were talking about the big old tree with all the that at the
Species under
beginning
it.
of it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, just curious if there's been any increase in research.
Um, I would say not really yet, but I think let's give it a few years because the social conversation is Andy's part of. It's going to create questions, and people are going to want answers. And I think when society gets interested, not just scientists, it takes on a new life, and it creates new work. And so I'm excited to see what scientists do over the next decade, say, because we don't know a lot. We know a lot, but we don't know a lot too. I mean, saprophilic beetles. Who in the world cares about beetles? or Ben, who likes Ichneumon wasps, which happen to like dead wood. Ben's the only one I know of that likes wasps of any sort. But there are people who really don't want to lose species, even if they got terrible sounding names. You hate to lose species from your place. And that's what we're at risk of if we don't understand it better. So I'm kind of optimistic about the next decade of researchers taking on new things.
Mhm.
Could
Yeah.
I add one thing more? There is a recent document that came out of the Penobscot Experimental Forest that has researched the last 50 years of forest cover in that forest, which was designed for different types of forest and forest practices. And what's interesting is that the single tree selection methodology was the one that provided the most benefit financially and biologically to the forest, as distinct from other wealth extraction strategies that tended to keep the forest much smaller in size, rather than this model. Was really interesting because it came out of 50 years worth of history that they documented their data on as they evaluated what are the costs and benefits in a lot of different ways with these different forest practices. And I think that can help inform, not advocacy, but that can help inform all of us. What the hell's going on here? What's going on with the woods? What do we need? And I keep thinking about what Mac Hunter said, and it's like we need those older ages and stages somehow in it. How we get to that, I don't know, but I think we need to get to that because that's the basis, the biological ecosystem basis of going forward for the next 7 generations, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Again, well said, perfectly said, Roger.
Cool. Well, it's
Okay,
7:30.
7:30.
So fascinating conversation. I hope everybody enjoyed it as much as I did. I've gotten to listen to John 3 times in the past few weeks, and I learned something, well, the past couple of months, I guess, and I learned something every single time. And I just think it is really important, and I'm really glad and hope something good will come out of, the LD 1529. That's really, and I'm glad that you're participating in that in some way as well, John. You'll be a good resource. So, Jonathan Milne from Lighthawk. I don't know if people have heard of him or know of what he does, but he does flyovers for organizations, nonprofits, I believe, for the most part. And so he wanted to be here, but couldn't make it tonight, but wanted to make sure that people were aware of what he could do if you have parcels that you want to look at. And then we have other upcoming events on the 28th of May. Jackie Robideau is on this call, is going to do a book talk in Greenville at the Public Safety Building. And on June 25th, Ben Emery, who is Karen Tilburg's husband, is going to do a talk on the history of canoes and watercraft in Maine, and that will be in Greenville as well. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you coming. We're a new land trust. We're, figuring out, where we're going to go, what we're going to do, what we want to protect. So if you have any thoughts, questions, feedback, want to participate, please don't hesitate to reach out. I put my contact in the chat. So.
All right. And let me know if Ben and I can help in any way. Let us know. We'd love to come to Greenville. So,
excellent.
Or anywhere up that way. We'll be there.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll be in touch. You're not going to get rid of me that easy.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
Alrighty.
And thank you, Roger, for joining in too.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you,
Take care,
Roger.
everybody.
Ben. Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.